Good evening. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming. This is an amazing crowd. It would have been very heartbreaking for me to walk out here and see 4 people. I'm very excited that everyone was able to make it tonight. It's going to be a very informal night. I'm not going to speak for very long. I'll just tell you a little bit about the book, and then I'm going to read a passage. Then I'll talk a little bit about kind of how it all came about, and then just take any questions that anyone might have. So the book is One Night in Mississippi. Today is the official release date, although it's been at Kohl's for a couple weeks. And it's a story about Warren Williams, who is a young man whose younger brother is brutally lynched in Mississippi in the 1960s. And the men that are responsible get away with it, and Warren is really haunted by that for a long time. But then decades later, some of the civil rights era cases start to be reopened, and Warren kind of finds purpose again in that and starts to investigate his own brother's murder, and that leads him to eventually find and confront Earl Olson, who was one of the men that's involved. So I tried to pick a passage that would give you a little bit of a sense of the story, but not give anything away. I'm just going to, I do need to set it up a little bit. So there's a point where Warren and Graydon, the 2 brothers, their father becomes ill, and so the 2 boys have to go into town to sell the cotton that they grow on their small farm, and the cotton buyer tries to cheat them. And Graydon catches him on the math, and the cotton buyer certainly doesn't take very kindly to that and sends the 2 boys home with almost nothing. And Warren is terrified to tell his father about this incident, and that's kind of where things sit leading into this scene. We kept the secret from our father for 6 days. He remained in bed for 3 days after our trip to town. On the 4th day, we heard him scuttling about the kitchen in the dust-colored dawn, and just as quickly heard Mama's animated whispers telling him to get back to bed for more rest. On the 5th day, he woke vigorously and ordered Mama to fix him a colossal breakfast. 6 eggs with 2 thick slabs of crusty bread and a half-inch thick piece of bacon. But he ate little, his appetite fading after a few triumphant mouthfuls. He went to the porch to sit in the weak sunlight, and after a reluctant nod of the head from Mama, Graydon and I pounced on his plate, slathering our fingers and chins with grease while Etta and Glenda watched with reservation. After a short time on the porch, Papa sank back into his previous state and spent the rest of the day in bed. We woke on the 6th day to the sound of wood splitting in the backyard. We found our father, axe in hand, sweating and still gaunt, but no longer as hollowed out as he had been the previous days. We stacked wood as he split and knew by his pace that his strength had returned. We worked through the morning without saying a word. Mama poked her head out the back door and called us for lunch. I'd spent the hours outside racking my brain for a way to avoid telling my father the truth, and in the end I decided the simplest thing was to say that Mr. Stevenson had shortchanged us. It would be believable enough. The reason Pop always went to town himself was to prevent us from being taken advantage of. And it would make sense that, feeling ashamed of the fact, I would wait as long as possible to tell him what had happened. I dipped my hands into the water bucket and started rubbing them clean, turning myself so that I would not have to look at my father when I told the story, but Graydon spoke first. I think Mr. Stevenson's been cheating you, sir. I turned in shock, eyes wide. Papa looked at Graydon as well, but his face was calm. He said nothing. His figures didn't add up. We brung 14 sacks, but he wasn't going to pay for 14 sacks. Warren and I tried to explain it to him, but he just got real angry. I flinched at hearing my name. Graydon's expression was unchanged, and I realized that he actually thought he was helping, that he was giving me credit for standing up alongside him when it wasn't true. I wanted no part of it then, and I wanted no part of it now. I shrunk against the side of the house as I dried my hands on an old rag and waited for my father's anger, but it didn't come. Papa stared at Graydon for a few moments and spoke quietly. Go on in the house. He walked away from us. We did as we were told, but he didn't join us. He picked up his axe again, and we ate corn and strips of ham left over from breakfast in the kitchen, listening to the rhythm of his chopping. I was getting ready for bed when Mom appeared in the doorway. Your father wants to talk to you. He's on the porch. Papa was holding a thin hand-rolled cigarette and blowing wisps of smoke into the dark blue dusk. He'd built a bench, and he gestured for me to sit beside him. I bought this from a Mr. Parson. For a moment I thought he was referring to the cigarette, but Papa was gazing out over the yard, at the carefully groomed dirt lawn and the chestnut tree. There wasn't no house on it then. It was just a scrubby patch of trees and bushes. Been cleared once of the big trees, but then it overgrown again. Your uncle and I spent the better part of a year reclearing it, cut down all those trees and bushes, pulled out all those stumps, hauled one rock out of the ground the size of a pig. Some of that wood I sold, some of it used to build this house. Most of it, well, Mr. Parsons sent a few boys over and they just took it. Wasn't much I could do about it. I sat silently studying my father. There was a lantern on the porch, but my father never liked to light it because of the insects. My father was just a shape in the darkness, a shadow shrouded in sweet-smelling smoke. Your brother's a smart one, and brave too, ain't no arguing against that. Well, every man has his place in the world, and there ain't much mercy for a man who tries to change that. I hear these men on the radio sometimes talking about changing things, talking about protesting and the like, but those men ain't from here. Some of them might be from Mississippi, but they ain't from this Mississippi. Papa raised the cigarette to his lips, and the faint glow seemed to shine off the lighter-colored scar tissue crisscrossing his forearm. I had never been curious about the scars before, but now I couldn't stop looking at them. I heard Mr. Parsons sold that wood for a good penny. Stuffed his pockets real good off this property, too. I knew I was paying more than what someone else would have had to, but that's the way it is. I could have fought, but then what would I have now? Sometimes a little common sense beats a whole lot of courage. Papa turned and leaned in towards me, close enough that I could make out his face. His eyes were yellow, and I realized that he was drunk. Yeah, I ain't as dumb as your brother thinks I am, and he ain't as smart as he thinks he is. All them figures and science and history he learns, those are things I ain't ever gonna know. But I know things that he ain't ever gonna learn either. I know how to survive. Graydon don't. All those smarts ain't gonna do nothing but get him in trouble. You need to look out for him. You hear me? Yes, sir. Papa turned his gaze back towards the darkness, and when no more was said, I got up to leave. Graydon was lying in bed. The lantern was lit, and he was writing figures on a sheet of paper. I watched him for a moment, replaying my father's words in my head until the meaning of them finally was clear. Papa was afraid of Graydon. Not afraid for him, but of him. And I realized that I was a little afraid of him too. Papa had called him brave, but that was the wrong word. Graydon was fearless, and that fearlessness made him dangerous, to himself and to all of us. He was capable of everything, and that realization terrified me, but also excited me. I sat beside him on the bed and looked at the sheet of numbers. Some of it looked familiar from the few classes that I had taken, but most of it was not. Can you show me that? Graydon held the sheet towards me so I could see it. No, I mean show me that. How to do that. Graydon hesitated, thinking it was some joke. Then he smiled broadly and handed me an empty sheet of paper and a spare pencil. And we stayed up until the early morning. Thank you. So I can tell you a little bit about how this all kind of came together. I started writing seriously kind of around 2006, 2007. In 2008, I took a creative writing course at Humber College. It was a year-long course working with a professional author there. And they've been tremendously supportive, not only while I was in the program, but also since. So that was a big step for me. And during that time that I was there at Humber, I was working on a novel-length manuscript called Simon's Choice. In 2010, I entered that manuscript in a contest, the Amazon Breakthrough Novel Award. And it's a contest where they're looking for the best unpublished manuscript, and they take 5,000 entries each year. So in 2010, I was a semifinalist in that contest, which the semifinal round is the final 50. So my manuscript was one of the top 50 out of 5,000 entered, and that was a tremendous confidence boost, and that was kind of when I first thought that I might have a shot at actually doing this at a professional level. I did not get a book deal out of that, but based on that showing, I was able to secure representation with Margaret Hart with the HSW Literary Agency in Toronto. So we started shopping the manuscript around sometime after 2010. And it's a very long, slow, patience-trying process because publishers want exclusive access to our work while they're considering it, but they also take 6 to 8 months to consider a work before you get a reply. So in a good year, you would submit to 2 people. Most years, you would only submit to 1. So it is a very long, long process. So we were going through that, and in late July of this year, Margaret sent me a message, and said someone from Dundurn was looking at my work and they wanted to know if I had anything else to show them. So I had this manuscript for One Night in Mississippi, which was mostly done. I might have lied a little bit about exactly how done it was, but I figured I could catch up. But I sent that in to them. I hadn't shown it to anyone yet, but I sent that in, and I felt pretty confident because I really liked the story, and also just the fact that they'd requested the work is a very good sign. But I was settling in for another 6 to 8 month wait and hoping that I would hear something positive at the end of that time. They actually got it back to me 10 days later with a contract offer. So it was a very, very quick turnaround, and it's the kind of thing that it took years and a lot of long days and a lot of long waiting, and then it just happened very, very suddenly. So that's kind of how the story of how it came about. I'll just open it up to any questions, if anyone has questions. I know probably not many people have had a chance to read the book yet, but if anyone has questions about kind of how the process was or anything.
Can you just talk a little bit about the research that you put into the story and how you incorporated that factual research into a fictional story?
Yeah, sure. It actually, I was inspired by something I saw in the news, so it actually started with research before the story ever came about. It is a fictional novel, but the civil rights era cases that were reopened in the early part of the 2000s is something that I saw in the news. And so there were quite a few of them, but a couple of the kind of high-profile ones were Byron de Lebeckwith was convicted 31 years after the assassination of Medgar Evers, and Edgar Ray Killen was convicted 41 years after killing 3 civil rights workers in Neshoba County. And so Edgar Ray Killen was 80 years old when he was convicted, and he got 3 consecutive life sentences. So seeing these 70 and 80-year-old men go to prison for things that they'd done 40 years ago and long since thought that they had gotten away with was really interesting, and also really interesting to see the reaction. By no means was the reaction split along racial lines. There were blacks and whites that thought it was a good thing, and blacks and whites that thought it was just digging up old trouble. So it kind of started with that, and collecting articles and reading more about that, and then I started to create characters and do a fictional story kind of around that, because I really was interested in kind of what life would have been like during that time in between for those people, if it's something they thought of every day, or if it's something that they just had totally put behind them. So it was kind of like research and then writing, and then after I had finished a draft, then I had to kind of make sure that everything was in place, so I started to dig into the research a little bit more, made a trip down to Mississippi, and was able to see quite a few places and visit there. So the research was definitely an interesting aspect of it, and particularly once I signed a deal and started working with an editor, it's amazing how picky they are about every little detail. So definitely, it's a great deal of research that goes into it, even though all of the stuff that you research, maybe 5% only goes into the story.
Got a multi-part question here.
Oh, one at a time.
First of all, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Secondly, I'm very surprised to see that there's no Dos Equis here, you being the most interesting man in the world, as far as I'm concerned, anyhow. Third part is, I've known you for a long time, and I know you're a computer science guy like myself, and where did this knack for wanting to write come from?
Thank you. There might be some Dos Equis afterwards. Writing is something that I've always wanted to do. In school, it was always my best subject and the thing that I enjoyed doing the most, but it wasn't anything that I ever thought would be viable as a career. So certainly when it came time to choose a career, I was being a little more practical. But as far as, I know that when I kind of announced this, a lot of people were surprised and didn't know that I had been writing anything at all. That's really just the fact that to be honest, I didn't want people asking me every single day, like, hey, how's the book going? Hey, how's the book going? So I didn't tell anybody about it. So definitely, I think you're not the only one who it came as a surprise to, and I think my family can attest. But definitely it's something that's always been an interest of mine, and it's a huge blessing to me to be able to kind of see it come to fruition like this. Yes?
So when's your next book, Shreve?
Did I not just cover that? I'm not going to answer those questions. So I mentioned that I have another manuscript. It is being looked at right now, so I have my fingers crossed on that, because then I wouldn't have to write another one yet. So that's being looked at, and we'll see how that goes. And I will kind of start something again, probably in spring or summer, but I won't talk to anyone about it. Yes.
Any questions?
Yeah.
Well, I know you're thirsty.
That's not a question.
Silence.
Let the woman talk.
Who were your biggest influences while writing the book?
I don't think that I really was influenced in terms of like style by any particular writer. Like I didn't try to emulate anybody, but Joan Barfoot was my mentor at Humber College and stayed in touch with her afterwards, so she provided a lot of valuable advice. I like Cormac McCarthy, Kim Eklund. I also, I read a lot of, what's that?
Was there anybody from Mississippi that influenced any of your writing?
Nope.
No.
Nope. Sorry.
Which character do you most relate to in the whole story? Is there one that kind of embodies you a little bit, or is there anything else?
No, I don't like to put myself in there at all. So the story is told from two different characters' points of view, and I enjoy being able to put myself into another character and try to understand how they see things and what the world looks like from their point of view. Even a character like Earl, who's not really a nice character, it still is interesting to try to see how someone like that would justify their own actions.
Have you been to Mississippi yet?
Yes, I have been to Mississippi, and there are some parts of it that look exactly like I'm sure it was in the 60s. You know, my GPS showed a lot of blank spaces while I was driving through some of the back roads there, and it's pretty scary. Take Bradley at the back there.
What's your favorite book?
I think The Crossing by Cormac McCarthy is probably my favorite, and I like The Disappeared by Kim Eklund. I hope that you know what your favorite book is now.
As an English teacher, what advice should I give my students who want to write a book?
I got a lot of advice, and it all kind of started sounding the same about just be patient and that kind of thing. So I didn't want to be patient, so I didn't really listen to that much. But the best advice I got was that writing is like anything else, that you have to do it poorly before you can do it well. So don't put pressure on yourself to sit down and write a bestseller the first time you put your pen to paper. You're going to write a bunch of stuff and throw it out, and write a bunch of stuff and throw it out. And you have to go through that until you get to something that you feel like you would represent yourself with, something that you feel confident showing other people. Yep.
Is this, like, when you started out, did you have an idea about how you wanted this story to go? And then when you wrote the first draft, did you sort of think, oh wow, this story is different than what I had imagined? Or did you have a pretty clear sense of what it was going to be before you even started?
Yeah, I had a pretty clear idea, and so with my other manuscript, it changed quite a bit during the process. The main storyline.
So between like your first draft and this, there wasn't too many.
There were a lot of changes in the writing and moving some of the scenes around and that kind of thing, but the main storyline stayed true to kind of what I had originally pictured. But definitely the structure was probably the part that I struggled with the most on this, because it is two different timelines and two different characters' points of views, and I kind of mixed and matched all that around quite a bit to try to find something that worked, and that was really the biggest challenge during the course of this one. Yes?
In your research, especially the guys that were convicted, they did this crime when they were younger, and 4 years later they got convicted.
Yeah.
Did you do any research on the line of thought, people that were guilty when they did it, as to 40 years later what their thoughts were?
The ones that I looked at were pretty unapologetic 40 years on. They felt like they were being wrongfully kind of prosecuted. and that, to them it's something that happened a long time ago, and a lot of the reaction was kind of, this is just a witch hunt, so there wasn't a lot of remorse, it didn't seem, that had developed over the course of those decades. Yes?
Shreve, do you work on it every day a little bit?
No.
Or do you work on it in chunks? How do you do it?
You know what, every single writer I've talked to says they sit down and they write every day, even if it's just for a little while, and I absolutely cannot do that. I definitely try to set aside chunks, and a lot of times those chunks are when I decide to do laundry, or dishes, or something else. It always seems to be the very last thing that's on my list, but I definitely need to have time set aside where I know I'm going to have a couple hours uninterrupted, not doing anything else, and I just don't have that every single day. I prefer being able to write in larger chunks as opposed to a kind of like 20 minutes here, 20 minutes there. So, but I don't put a lot of pressure on myself to kind of do that, as long as when I'm working on a story, I have the characters in my head, I'm thinking through problems, I'm working things out. So even if I'm not sitting at my desk writing, I still feel like I'm making progress. So I don't worry so much about a word count.
How about the language? I mean, you're a Canadian,
Yeah.
and you're writing from a story based in Mississippi. I mean, the way they articulate their words, and how did you get around that? And how did you deal with that? And was your editor very picky about how you came across in the book?
No, actually, the editor didn't have any problem with kind of the portrayal of the language. It really just, again, kind of comes down to, I kind of put myself in their shoes and tried to, it's almost like an acting exercise, I guess. I just kind of think, like, how would they talk and that kind of thing. So, but to be honest, that's a component that I didn't do a great deal of research on. I just kind of worked it out, and if I thought that it felt natural and was fitting for the character, then I went with it, and the editor thought that everything was okay, so that's how we went with it. Yes?
Did you ever kind of get where doubt, sort of where you were like, why am I doing this? This is awful, or whatever
No,
the
yeah.
voice of doubt is in your head, and how did you sort of
Yeah, it's
get
a
through
really, really difficult industry. To get published is like a lottery type of deal. So definitely there were times when I just flat out quit.
like quit this book and said, I'm not going to do it, forget it?
Quit writing. Yeah, no, quit doing anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But that's the thing, is if you quit and you walk away from it, then it's not something that you really want to do. If you quit and a couple weeks later you have to come back to it, then you know that this is something that you're committed to. So yeah, I mean, I quit a dozen times. So sometimes you just need a break from it, and you can only be told no so many times before you have to kind of stop asking, and you do need to get away from it at times. Yes?
I have two questions.
Okay.
First one is, you have a book signing tomorrow in Chatham.
Yes.
Will you be traveling around for book signings in Ontario, or?
Not at this time. So the timing of this is a little bit unfortunate, because I did have personal travel plans already in place that are coming up shortly. And those were already locked in before I signed this deal. So they told me what the publication date was, and I said, that's great, but I can't do a lot of promotion, unfortunately, or at least not right around that time. So I don't have a whole lot planned. I have, like you said, I'm at Coles tomorrow from 1 till 3. I am going to be at the museum in Buxton on April 11th, the afternoon of April 11th. And then after that, we'll kind of see how the book is received, if there are certain areas where it's popular, and if there's kind of an opportunity for me to get out there. But I'm also hoping once summer comes around, there are a lot more of like book fairs and that kind of thing, so I'd like to be able to do some of those types of events.
Okay, second question
Yep.
is, the gentleman that you are with a lot on Wednesdays want to know when the movie's coming out. Because they want to be.
First of all, none of them are going to be in it. You've seen what they all look like, so it's not going to work out for, I don't think. I don't have any line on any opportunities or that, but yeah, if anybody knows somebody, then let me know. It'd be great. Yes.
Were there any other topics that you wanted to write about?
Yes, I have like a file with like 10 different book ideas in it that I kind of flip through every once in a while and see which one kind of grabs my attention. So as I come across things that I'm interested in, I'll just kind of open something up and I'll make some notes. And so one day maybe I'll get around to some of them or all of them or a couple of them, who knows. But I definitely keep a file of ideals that interest me. I think, no? Okay, sorry, yep.
The graphic details of Graydon's death, was that taken from typical autopsy reports, or did you come up with that?
I came up with it, but I did, I mean, there. I could have probably been more graphic, actually, and been in line with factual. So certainly, I read about some of the torturous acts that took place, and I kind of know what the level of brutality was. So it was in line with that. Yes. Yes.
What did you do when you were finished? And how did you know when you were finished? Did you just...
I think I was talking to someone earlier. I said you're finished when the publisher tells you like it's going to press.
Yeah.
So right up until then, you're changing this sentence and that sentence. So you're not ever finished until they take it away.
And was there a little bit of a letdown, like, or was there like an empty, like, how all of a sudden are you?
So
was it a weird
it's
feeling,
been a little
or?
bit of a like I said, I signed the contract in August, and that was obviously a high. And then they tell you how much work they want you to do between August and February, and that's a bit of a low. So definitely, in this kind of 6 months since then, I've been trying to just kind of stay level until today. I guess I didn't want to get too excited until kind of the date comes when it's released, and I can kind of share it with everyone. So I've been keeping the emotions in check over the last 6 months. Yes. Yes.
You found out that you're getting the deal.
Yeah.
Who was the first person that you called?
Actually, I was at work when it happened, and I kind of did this at my desk. So the coworkers were the first ones to actually find out, just because of proximity. Yes.
So when you're writing a book and you have to come up with your characters, do you make those up completely out of your imagination, or do you base those on people you know, or?
I go out of my way to avoid basing anyone on anyone I know, unless it's like a very minor character. There are still times where I'll throw somebody in as a minor character, but definitely for the major characters, I not only do I create them from scratch, but then I review it to make sure that nobody's going to read it and think that it's them. And that's someone had asked me about like, why didn't you set something in Chatham? And I'm just not comfortable really setting anything locally, because then people read it and think, oh, that's me, or he's talking about my cousin, or what, that kind of thing. So I tried to avoid that, definitely. Yes?
How involved are you in the album, or not the album cover, but the artwork in the front?
Not a lot, but I did actually. That's so my editor, whenever she would make changes, whenever she would suggest changes, I would read them and I would go, "That's not right." And then after I thought about it for a while, I go, "Yeah, that's right." And so she was right, 100% of the time. The cover was actually the one thing that I did kind of ask to be changed. They initially said it was a very similar layout, but it was of a kind of a city scene. And they sent it to me, and I'd been waiting, and I opened it up, and I loved it right away. And the original one. But my editor said, she gave me very good advice. She said, wait 24 hours before you decide. And it's good that she did, because I was excited right away. But then the more I looked at it, I realized, well, I like the way it looks, but it's not really representative of the story. Most of the story takes place in more of a rural setting, and so that was the feedback I provided. And I really didn't want to be, this being my first time through the process, I don't know if I'm being a diva or if I'm being, so I didn't want to ask for too much, but I did ask them to change the cover. And luckily she agreed with that and went to bat for me, so we came up with this. So I didn't have any input into the original cover design, but I did have input into making some changes. Are there any? Yes?
Just curious, so when you send the book in or your manuscript to the publisher, do they have a lot of strength to make you change something in the book? And if you didn't want it to be changed, how does that work?
Well, so that would all kind of vary from editor to editor, I guess. I mean, ultimately, certainly they can, if they're not happy with it, at any point they can just say deals off. So they do kind of have all the power in that sense, but and that was one of the things that I was worried about, is how much change is going to happen. But during like the first conversation with my editor, she kind of put me to ease in that and said, this book is going to have your name on it. You're the one that has to be happy with it. So she never changed her word, which was great. She would kind of write her suggestions in the columns and that kind of thing, and then would leave it to me to rewrite or rework the sections. So she was very gentle. As Diane Young, she was fabulous to work with, and really allowed me to keep this as my story. Miss?
When did you decide that would be the title?
Well, that's okay. So the original title was actually Gray, because the character that's lynched, his name is Graydon, and there was a storyline that's kind of been shaped out because it didn't really kind of fit in the rest of it. That was his nickname for. I won't get into it, but so the original title of the story was actually Gray. And they said, we don't want people to get confused with 50 Shades of Grey. And, which I thought 50 Shades of Grey sold like 10 million copies, so I don't mind being confused with that. But so they actually, they asked me to change the title, and this is what we came up with together. Are there any other questions? Yes?
I haven't read the book yet, but is it appropriate
It's
for
good.
younger?
It's got some language in it. I don't think there's anything too graphic, but language is.
So would it be appropriate for an elementary school to be reading it in their class?
Probably not. I would read it first before you decide on that, but yeah. Yes?
Shreve, when you get a movie deal, who would you pick to play the main character?
Oh, I got a couple of volunteers in the back, and that means that I think the movie deal is not coming out for a long time then, because you're going to have to get a little older.
You're going to go with the younger one.
Yeah. Well, they can switch in and out. I'm not too worried about it, but I don't think you're eligible, Jeff. So. Well, if there are no more questions, then so the rest of the evening, the bar's open, and I'm just going to be over here for sales and signing. Again, really grateful to everyone for coming out. This is amazing to see so many people. Even if you're not buying a book or getting anything signed, please come over and say hi. I'd love to be able to talk to everyone tonight. And I also want to give a big thank you to Thames Art Gallery and to Sonia for setting all this up for me. They've been amazing. And there might still be a couple of snacks left in the corner that came from Williams Cafe, I believe, that provided the food. So thank you to them as well. And just, I can't say thank you enough for everyone for coming out. Thank you.